Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today we are going to be covering another prospect in this upcoming 2022 NBA draft. And today we are going to be taking a look at Notre Dame's Blake Wesley. So without any further delay, let's get straight into the video. Moving on to some stats regarding Blake Wesley, he is 18 years old, stands at about 6 feet 5 inches, weighs about 185 pounds, and has a 6 foot 11-inch wingspan. Very, very impressive physical profile for the young guard, especially that wingspan. Love to see it being so wide, especially for a 6'5" guard. We haven't necessarily seen too many prospects have that plus of a wingspan through this draft process so far. So very glad to see that. However, moving on to his on-court stats, as I mentioned, he is 18 years old, so that of course means that this is his freshman year, his first year at Notre Dame, where he is averaging a pretty solid 14.1 points, 3.3 rebounds, 2.9 assists, and 1.1 steals per game. Very solid counting stats, however, on the efficiency side of things, not too pretty. He has an effective field goal percentage of 46.3, which is pretty bad, not gonna lie. He's also shooting 66.7% from the free throw line, which is, as you guys can tell, is not very good. However, looking at some other advanced stats, he does have a three-point attempt rate of 43.2%. And I always mention this in every video. I like to explain three-point attempt rate in case I do have new viewers. Three-point attempt rate essentially means that this percentage of a player's total shots are coming from behind the arc. So that basically means out of all the field goals that Blake Wesley is taking, 43 of his total shots are coming from behind the arc, which is very impressive. You like to see that from a young guard, and I like to include it for all my prospects. Again, I'll state it as I do in all my videos, just to give us a glimpse into that player's shot profile. And I also thought it was pretty important to include Blake Wesley's usage rate, since he does have a 32.5% usage rate, which is extremely high and by far the highest on this Notre Dame team. And I wanted to include it again just to give you guys some insight into how much Blake Wesley is shooting the ball and dominating the ball, right? We've taken a look at some prospects before, and we've kind of seen, well, their efficiency isn't all that high, but their volume isn't all that high, right? So that could potentially mean that, if they had more shots, maybe it could improve. And where I just wanted to include Blake Wesley's usage rate just to show you guys that no, that is not the case. He is getting up a lot of shots and he's just not necessarily making them, which is something we'll talk about later on in the video. Moving on to some of the strengths of Blake Wesley as a prospect. First up, I want to talk about his handle. I think it's the most encouraging part, or the most encouraging tangible part of his game right now, as I think a lot of his game is based on potential. I'm going to be brutally honest. I was struggling mightily to find, tangible, real strengths of Blake Wesley's game right now. Of a lot of weaknesses, but not too many actual tangible strengths. However, I do think his handle is one of those lone strengths. I think he's very shifty. His body control is something that we will talk about later. However, in certain instances of his game, however, in terms of his body control, when he is trying to beat his man down, I think it's very good. I think he does a great job of utilizing snake dribbles, wrapping around, wrapping around the screener, and the big man in pick and roll situations. I also think he does a great job of utilizing drop crosses. He likes to use a lot of those when he's getting to the rim. And I think in general he does a great job of just putting together different moves to create, combo moves, to create his own shot. And his handle combined with his height and his 6'11" wingspan pretty much allows him to get to wherever he wants on the court at will. As I mentioned, his ability to pretty much get to where he wants to, on the court. He doesn't. The thing with Blake Wesley is he doesn't necessarily struggle to get his shots off. It's just, you know, getting those shots to fall. We're going to talk about those mechanics in just a little bit. But, as I mentioned here, he's shown flashes as an on-ball creator. And it's just that. It's just flashes. However, when it does look good, I think that, as I mentioned here, his body control is as I mentioned before, his body control is good in certain aspects, but I think it's also poor in others. And one of the areas where it is good is, when he's creating his shot, I think he does a great job of pulling up at a moment's notice. There were a couple times that I noticed against Louisville where he would just pulled up in transition at a moment's notice, and he struggles in as I mentioned, with his body control in certain areas. And then when you see that where he's able to just pull up, full body just on a moment's notice. It's like, wow, okay, well, I didn't know he was capable of that, right? Because he can be a bit clumsy as an athlete. So I think he's shown a lot of upside as a creator. However, it's going to take a lot of work to get there. However, the potential is there again with his handle and with his height. Uh, Overall, however, moving on to the defensive side of the floor, I think he has shown a lot of potential as a point of attack defender, and that is pretty much due to his length. I think the body control doesn't necessarily translate defensively, especially laterally for him. It's a bit clunky against the better ball handlers that he has played against. However, we'll talk about that later. His length pretty much allows him to make up for that clunkiness a lot of times. Again, just because of that wingspan and that height, and it can cause a lot of ball handlers problems. And if he gets the chance to pluck the ball, he does a great job of diving on the floor for loose balls, and he always just is hustling to make that extra play, especially on ball, which is something that you love to see. So I definitely think there's a lot of upside for him in terms of being a point of attack defender. I also think he plays passing lanes very good as a strong side defender. Whenever he's one pass away, he does a great job of picking off those lanes, and he has great anticipation, in terms of, picking off those strong side passing lanes, which is, again, something that you love to see. And I think, him being a pretty positive overall strong side defender, again, both on ball and off the ball, is something that you like to see uh, as, as such a young prospect. And with a prospect that has so many other holes in his game. Okay, here we go. We are moving on to the concerns regarding Blake Wesley as a prospect, and there are a lot of them. First up, I want to talk about the offensive side of the floor, where his release it's a problem. It's a big problem for somebody who likes to create his shot and shoot as many shots as Blake Wesley does. And the main problem I have with his release is that his shooting hand in particular is just very low. Even when he is matched up against smaller guards, a lot of times his shooting hand is just it's not even that much higher than the head of the player that's guarding him. Even if that player is like 6'2", 6'3", his shooting hand is like right there, right above his defender's head, which is unacceptable. That shooting hand has to be way higher, and there's no excuse for a player that has a 6'11" wingspan for his release to be as low as it is. And his guide hand, as we've seen with a lot of players, typically fades off. It's just a bad shot, a bad shot. A lot of times, like Wesley just loves to take contested, pull up shots, and I understand that he can get to those shots, but his release is just so low that a lot of times you could just see the arc on his shot. It just clanks. The shot just goes like it's a shot is just straight, and it's pretty infuriating to watch because it's like all he has who's teaching who's his trainer, like what are the coaches telling him, like his release is so obviously low. And in my opinion, that's the biggest problem with his offensive game right now. And I feel like if his release was much higher, much more uh, technically sound, I feel like he would be a much more efficient player and in turn be a much better prospect than what he is right now. However, that release is extremely low, and that's what he needs to work on from day one. And his release is low at the free throw line, which is a big reason why he struggles from the free throw line, because just like with his pull up jump shots, his free throw shot is just straight. There's no arc in his shot, and it often hits the back of the rim, which again is all in due to his shooting hand being so low on the release. And I do think that it also affects his spot up shots, although to a lesser extent, because I think he has a lot more time to kind of settle in. And I do think that he's also allowed, excuse me, to get elevation on his spot up shot, so it's not that much of a problem compared to his on ball shooting or his free throw shooting. And he also has time to shoot as a spot up shooter. He doesn't necessarily have people covering him all the time. He kind of has a second to catch and then elevate up in the shot. But moving on to another part of his shot that also bothers me, that his balance on his body is just a bit weird. Like his body's always tilted to the left, but he's a right-handed shooter. And it's almost like his body's positioned to the point where as if he's already going to walk away when he's shooting the ball. And I feel like he needs to, work on, really balancing his body. You don't necessarily see this too much, except for when he is spotting up. And I feel like that's something that he definitely needs to work on. He's a much better spot up shooter than he is, an on ball shooter or even a free throw shooter. However, I think that if he worked out that mechanic, that hitch in his shot, that body hitch in his shot, I feel like he would also be a much better shooter. So these are two big things mechanically, more so specifically with the elevation of his shooting hand on the release. I feel like these are two big things in his game that if they were to change, I would view Blake Wesley in a much brighter light than I do right now. However, moving on to even bigger concerns, I have his overall athleticism. I know I mentioned before that his body control was pretty solid in certain aspects of the game, and also just his overall his just athletic feel. It can be impressive at some points, but just overall his lack of burst is apparent, and it really plays on really all sides, every side of the court, really. And I think you mainly see it when he's trying to break down his defender. A lot of times, he just doesn't have that burst of speed. A lot of times you see guards and they're just able to just not only change direction, but they just have that extra gear of speed that they can kick into. And Blake Wesley just doesn't have that. He just doesn't have that. And a lot of times he's just kind of hopping around. But you see some of the best guards, they're able to hop around, but they hop around because they want to keep you guessing what they're gonna do so that they can just explode. And that's not really the case with Blake Wesley. He's just always kind of hopping around because he just doesn't have that burst. So he struggles a lot of times with getting to getting to the rim. I wouldn't necessarily say he struggles a lot of times with getting there. He gets to the rim often. It's just a matter of him getting to the rim is a lot more difficult simply because he just doesn't have that burst, that extra speed that he can get to. And it also hurts with his ability to create separation on his shots. And I think that this was most apparent in his game against Duke, where there are a lot of times where he was just taking tough contested shots, and he just wasn't able to create space against guys like Jeremy Roche or AJ Griffin, simply because he just didn't have the ability to. When he was matched up against the best athletes in the country, a guy like AJ Griffin, who's one of the best athletes in this class, he just couldn't do anything. He just couldn't do anything because he just couldn't create enough separation against those guys. And another part of his athleticism that is very apparent is that it just takes a minute for him to accelerate. And you see this again a lot of times on the offensive side of the floor, where even if he is speeding up a little bit, and I'm not saying that he has that burst, but even when he is accelerating to a faster pace than where he usually is, it just takes him a minute. And him having to instead of you look at a player like AJ Griffin, for example, and he just has that change of speed, that burst. He just does it automatically. He doesn't have to think about it. Well, it seems like when Blake Wesley is changing acceleration, it seems like he almost has to think about it rather than it just being an instinctive thing, which is very concerning because you're looking at a prospect where the release is extremely low. He's not going to be able to create his own shot all that well off the dribble. And even though his spot up threes aren't bad, you're going to be talking about he's going to be playing against much better athletes, guys who are going to be able to close out onto his shot a lot quicker, who are going to be a lot bigger. And even when he was matched up against Duke, he was terrible against Duke in every facet of the game. He was terrible against Duke, and I feel like that's going to be the version of Blake Wesley that we're going to more so see at the NBA level, at least right away. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I view him as much more of a long-term project. However, moving on to another aspect of his offensive game that I really don't like is his finishing around the rim is just awful. It's bad. And as I mentioned before, he does a pretty solid job of getting to the rim. However, just finishing at the rim is just oof. And it's with both hands. He's primarily a right-handed finisher, but his left-handed finishing, it's like his right-handed finishing is pretty bad, but his left-handed finishing is just terrible. And there's a lot of times where he gets to the rim, and you can see the flashes of that body control that he displays when he's for example, when he's utilizing his snake dribbles, right? You see the body control there, and sometimes you see that same body control around the rim. That ability to manipulate his body. However, it's just that burst, and he's not all that. He doesn't have all that great of a vertical. Excuse me. At least it doesn't appear that way by the way he plays on the court, and it's just he struggles a lot of times with finishing at the rim, and a lot of times he'll just get to the rim with no plan at all in terms of finishing. And a lot of times he'll just try to a lot of his layups will just end up with bricks against the backboard a lot of times. And this was very, very concerning against Duke, where when he was matched up against Mark Williams, I'm not sure how many exact blocks Mark Williams had on Blake Wesley, But if I had to count, off the top of my head, I had to say at least four minimum, and they were just embarrassing blocks where Blake Wesley was just moving slower than Mark Williams. He was just moving slower than him, and it was like watching a senior play against a high school freshman. That's really what it looked like. It was that bad, and I was kind of embarrassed for Blake Wesley. I'm not going to be on. I'm not. Excuse me. I'm going to be honest. It was just bad, and it was really eye popping because you've seen him display some flashes here and there. You're like, all right. You watch some of his film against much lesser teams, and you're like, okay, I can see the blueprint for Blake Wesley. Then when you watch him against Duke, against a first one of the better bigs in the class, in my opinion, Mark Williams is a top five big, but he's at the end of the top five, probably in that 4 or 5 spot, maybe even potentially lower. And the fact that he made Blake Wesley look that bad, that's very eye popping. And Mark Williams is going to be a backup big, at the NBA level next year, and it's very very concerning. However, moving on to the defensive side of the floor, I kind of feel bad for harping so much on his offensive game. But moving on to the defensive side of the floor, even though he is a pretty good strong side defender and point of attack defender, I do think that his weak side defense does leave a bit to be desired. That lack of burst does play into his ability to maneuver around screens. I think that also he tends to fall asleep a bit off ball when he is a weak side defender. When he's a strong side defender, he's much more alert and active. However, when he is more so weak side, he can fall asleep, especially when there's multi-screen action going on. But as I mentioned again, he's only 18, so I could see some of this improving. However, moving on to a different aspect of his defensive game, he does struggle a lot with just being pushed around. You don't necessarily see this against again some of the lower competition he has played, but against some of the higher competition he has played, it's just evident that he just needs to add weight on his frame, and he does also have a very small frame, so I question how much weight exactly he can add. But he can get pushed around a lot of times by bigger wings and bigger guards, and also he struggles to get through screens at times as a point of attack defender, even though he does have that height and wingspan. So overall, with Blake Wesley, as you guys can tell by now, I'm not that big of a fan. It's just I get that he's 18, and I get that he's a 6'5" shot creator with a 6'11" wingspan, with a good handle, with a shifty deep bag, right? I get all that, but there's just functional things wrong with Blake Wesley as a basketball player that I just don't know if they can be corrected. Like, can he get much faster? Maybe, but I don't know, right? I don't know. It's like, can he become a way better athlete than he is? Maybe. Can he get a much better vertical than he has? Maybe. Can he develop can the shot be fixed? Right? I think it can, but I those are some of the more pressing issues in his game. More so with his athleticism. It's just I don't know if those things can be fixed. I'm not betting on those things being fixed. I don't think they can. And again with the jump shot, of course, I think that can be fine tuned. His off ball IQ, I think, can be fine tuned, and his shot selection as well. I didn't really talk about it too much, but his shot selection is awful. He takes a lot of difficult shots. I think that can be fine tuned as well. But I think similar to a player like Pat Baldwin, I think his role is gonna have to be relegated extremely from day one at the NBA level. He's gonna have to be a spot up shooter, and that's it, and work his ass off on defense. That's it. That's literally it. I wouldn't want Blake Wesley doing too much for my team. Uh, you know, it's just the athleticism just really really scares me, and that combined with some of the technical issues in his jump shot and whatnot, even if the handle is enticing and there is long term potential there in terms of being an on ball shot creator, it's just these weaknesses are really scary for me, and me personally, I view Blake Wesley as an end of the first round prospect, maybe even a second round pick, depending on how my big board will look, that I will get to in a future video in the near future. And that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think about Blake Wesley in the comments. Am I being too harsh on him? Again, he is 18 years old, so of course he does have room to improve. Of course, he can improve. But let me know what you guys think about him again in the comments. Am I being too harsh? Are you guys a lot higher on him? Do you guys think he should go higher than the late first round? Do you guys think he should go lower than the late first round? Let me know in the comments. And aside from that, again, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed and you enjoy my content, please subscribe and share with a friend if you want to keep growing the channel, keep growing the community that we have here. And again, that's the end of the video. Please stay safe out there and take care. Peace.